Imagine an old, frail servant, a man who has given his entire life in silence, falling to his knees at a grand coffin. His hands tremble as he begs, whispering desperate words of love and farewell to the only woman who ever protected him. Tears stream down his weathered face. The entire cathedral of nobles holds its breath. Then, the heavy doors creak open. In walks the Duke's beautiful, ambitious new Duchess, cold eyes scanning the room like a predator. What she does next, in front of everyone, is so terrifying, so cruel, that it doesn't just break one old man's heart. It threatens to destroy everything the beloved late Duchess fought to protect. And the worst part, this betrayal may have started long before the coffin was even closed. Stay with me, dear friends, because this story of hidden love, decades of sacrifice, and shocking revenge will stay with you long after it ends. A hand slammed down hard on the polished oak lid of the coffin. The sharp crack echoed through the vaulted stone walls of the cathedral, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. Another hand joined the first, fingers curling desperately around the wood, knuckles white and trembling. Not from age alone, though the man's thin frame and bent spine told of 70 hard years. This was something deeper, grief twisted with fear, a lifetime of silence finally fracturing. Caspar Thorne, the old stable servant no one ever truly saw, had dropped to his knees before Duchess Isolde Pennington's coffin. His forehead nearly touched the cold marble floor as broken whispers slipped from his lips. "Please, my lady, forgive me for not protecting you. Forgive me for staying hidden all these years." The grand cathedral of St. Marin had not witnessed a funeral of this magnitude in decades. 600 nobles filled the dark wooden pews, their velvet and furs heavy with the scent of incense and restrained ambition. They had come for show, for the political math that followed any great lady's death, but none of them belonged in this moment. Not like Caspar did. He pressed a faded blue ribbon against the coffin lid, his frail hands shaking as he begged in a voice only the dead could fully hear. Tears carved paths down his weathered cheeks. For 30 years he had brushed the horses at dawn, mopped the halls after banquets, and kept his head bowed. For 30 years he had carried a secret that could have burned House Hargrave to the ground. Now the only person who had ever shielded him lay cold inside this box, and the weight of it was crushing him. The cathedral guards exchanged uneasy glances. One shifted his halberd, but neither moved to stop the old servant. What harm could he do? He was just a ghost in rough-spun clothing. Then the heavy main doors groaned open. Silk whispered against marble. Every head turned. Duke Benedict Hargrave entered first, tall, stone-faced, his black coat gleaming with silver buttons, but he was not alone. At his side walked his new wife, barely 3 months into their marriage. Lady Seraphina Voss, now Duchess Seraphina Hargrave. She moved like winter itself, elegant, pale, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of frost. Her morning gown was impeccable, yet something in her posture made the air grow colder. She stopped a few paces from the coffin, her gaze locking onto the kneeling servant. A faint, chilling smile touched her lips. Caspar did not look up at first. He kept whispering, clutching the blue ribbon, as though it were the last thread connecting him to Isolde. But Seraphina stepped closer. Her voice, when it came, sliced through the silence like shattered glass. "Get up, you pathetic old fool." The words landed like a slap. Gasps rippled through the pews. A duchess did not speak to a servant that way. Not here, not now. Caspar lifted his head slowly, his eyes red and desperate. "Please, your grace, just one moment more with her." Seraphina's laugh was soft, but it carried a terrifying edge. She leaned down slightly, her voice low enough that only those nearest could hear, yet loud enough for the echo to spread. "You think you can grovel here, and no one will notice what you really are? How quaint." She straightened, her eyes gleaming with something cruel and knowing. "Perhaps it's time everyone learned the truth about the little secret my husband's first wife kept so carefully hidden." Duke Benedict's hand tightened at his side, but he said nothing. The nobles leaned forward, scenting blood in the water. The guards froze. Serafina raised her voice, clear and venomous, for the entire cathedral to hear. "Stand up, Lord Cassian Ashford, or should I say, the last traitor's son who has been living under our roof like a rat for 30 years. The words hung in the air like smoke. Caspar's face drained of color. The blue ribbon slipped from his fingers onto the coffin lid. And in that moment, every soul in the cathedral realized the funeral of Duchess Isolde Pennington had just become something far more dangerous. Something was about to break. The silence that followed Serafina's cruel declaration was deafening. Nobles sat frozen in their pews, whispers already slithering through the rows like poison. Duke Benedict's jaw tightened, but he remained motionless beside his new wife, his face an unreadable mask. Caspar Thorne, no, Cassian Ashford, stayed on his knees, the faded blue ribbon trembling between his fingers as the weight of 30 hidden years crashed down in a single moment. Yet in the midst of that shattering revelation, the memory of Isolde rose like a fragile light against encroaching darkness. Duchess Isolde Pennington had been the heart of House Hargrave for nearly 3 decades, not through grand displays of power, but through quiet, relentless kindness that touched thousands. She walked the charity wards herself, holding the hands of fevered mothers and comforting war orphans who had lost everything. During the terrible Harkon famine, when the crown's supplies failed, she sold her own jewels, emerald necklace, sapphire bracelets, even her wedding pearls, to buy grain for the eastern provinces. She visited each of the 14 orphan schools twice a year, remembering the children's names and the small dreams they whispered to her. The common folk adored her. They called her the saint of the western provinces in hushed, grateful tones. The nobles tolerated her, smiling at her charity dinners while whispering that such softness was weakness in a duke's wife. But Isolde never cared for their opinions. She had seen enough cruelty in her youth to know that true strength often wore the face of mercy, and no one knew that better than Caspar. From the very beginning she had been his salvation. When the soldiers came for him 30 years ago, when House Ashford was erased in a single brutal season, it was young Isolde, then only 19, who risked everything. She had hidden him in her father's servant quarters, cut his hair herself, dressed him in rough clothes, and given him the name Caspar Thorne. "Stay hidden," she had whispered that night, her hand steady on his. "I will find a way to restore what was stolen from you. Just give me time." He had believed her. How could he not? She was the girl who once tied a blue ribbon around his wrist at a harvest festival, laughing when he blushed. The only person who had ever looked at Cassian Ashford and seen a man worthy of love, not a threat. For 30 years she had protected him, visiting the stables every morning not to ride, but to speak with him in low, gentle voices about everything and nothing. Politics, memories of their childhood, the weight he carried in silence. She had guided her husband Benedict away from his father Edmund's corrupt path, slowly dismantling the old rot while keeping Cassian's true identity buried until the moment was safe. But now she was gone. Found cold in her private chambers 3 days earlier, a half-drunk cup of tea still on her desk. The physicians called it a sudden failure of the heart, natural causes. Yet those closest to her knew she had been declining. A persistent cough, blood on her handkerchiefs she tried to hide, exhaustion that no rest could ease. She had only confided the full truth to 2 people, Benedict and Caspar. And now, as Serafina stood triumphant beside the coffin, a terrible question lingered in the cold cathedral air. Had Isolde's death truly been natural? Or had the same forces that once destroyed House Ashford reached out once more to remove the one woman who had dared to protect the last surviving Renard? "Wait, Ashford, air." Serafina's voice cut through the growing murmurs again, sharper this time. "Remove this impostor from my sight," she commanded the guards, her eyes glittering with dangerous satisfaction. The late Duchess's misplaced affections have gone on long enough. Caspar's heart clenched as rough hands reached for him. In that moment, he understood with chilling clarity that the real storm was only beginning, and the new Duchess had no intention of showing the mercy that Isolde once had. The guards hesitated only a moment before obeying Serafina's command. Rough hands seized Caspar's arms and hauled him to his feet. Pain shot through his clicking right knee, but he barely felt it. His mind was still reeling from the public exposure, the name Cassian Ashford ringing in his ears like a death knell. As they dragged him toward the side doors, his eyes remained fixed on the coffin, on the faded blue ribbon, now lying abandoned on its lid. 30 years of perfect invisibility had ended in a single heartbeat. No one had ever truly seen Caspar Thorne. To the household, he was simply the old stable hand who appeared before dawn, brushing horses with trembling hands, until the tremor in his left arm forced him to pause. He mopped endless marble floors after lavish banquets, carried firewood up narrow stairs until his bent spine screamed in protest, and repaired fences along the eastern pastures with fingers stiffened by decades of hard labor and colder winters. New servants often assumed he was mute. He spoke so rarely, and when he did, his voice was little more than a rasp. Yet every morning, without fail, Duchess Isolde had come to the stables. She never rode. She simply leaned against the stall door in her simple morning gown, watching him work while they spoke in quiet tones no one else ever heard. She remembered the names of his favorite horses. She asked about the pain in his shoulder from an old lance wound he never mentioned to others. And every time she left, she would smile softly and say the same words. "Don't let those horses miss me, Caspar." It was their private code, their way of saying everything that could never be spoken aloud. For 30 years he had lived inside the house of his enemies, polishing saddles that bore the Hargrave crest, serving the family whose patriarch had destroyed everything he once held dear. He ate scraps from kitchens built on stolen Ashford wealth. He slept in a narrow servant's cot 10 feet below the chambers, where Duke Edmund Hargrave had once slept without guilt. Every single day he swallowed the rage and grief and held his tongue, because Isolde had asked him to trust her, because she had promised she would make it right. And he had believed her. Even now, as the guards shoved him into a small antechamber off the main cathedral, the memory of her warmth warred with the icy dread settling in his chest. Serafina Voss, now Hargrave, was nothing like Isolde. Where Isolde had seen suffering and tried to heal it, Serafina saw weakness and moved to crush it. The way she had smiled while speaking his true name made it terrifyingly clear. She did not intend to honor Isolde's wishes. She intended to bury them. Duke Benedict had remained strangely silent during the confrontation. Caspar wondered what hold the new Duchess already had over him. Only 3 months married, and already she moved, as though the entire estate belonged to her. Alone in the dim chamber, Caspar sank onto a wooden bench. His left hand shook violently now, the tremor worse than it had been in years. From the inner pocket of his worn coat, he drew out a second keepsake, a small, carefully folded letter from Isolde, given to him in secret weeks before her death. He had read it so many times the paper was growing thin. "My dearest friend, when I am gone, Benedict will do what is right. Stay strong. The horses will need you." A bitter sound escaped his throat, half laugh, half sob. The door opened. Instead of the guards, Duke Benedict stepped inside, alone. For a long moment, the two men regarded each other. The powerful duke and the broken servant, who was once his equal in blood. "You should have left years ago," Benedict said quietly, though there was no cruelty in his voice, only exhaustion. Caspar met his eyes. "She asked me to stay." Benedict's gaze dropped to the letter in Caspar's hands. Something flickered across the duke's face. Regret, perhaps, or fear. "And now Serafina knows everything," he murmured. "She has already begun asking questions about Isolde's final days, about the tea she drank that morning." The implication hung heavy in the air. Caspar felt ice crawl down his spine. If the new Duchess was willing to publicly humiliate him at his beloved's funeral, what else was she capable of? What had truly happened to Isolde? And how far would Serafina go to bury the last living witness to the old sins of House Hargrave? The dim antechamber faded as Caspar closed his eyes, the faded blue ribbon clutched tightly in his trembling hand. 30 years dissolved in an instant, pulling him back to a time when he had still been Lord Cassian Ashford, young, proud, and unafraid. He had been 27 during the Border War, a decorated captain leading heavy cavalry for House Ashford. The northern mountain passes under their control with the kingdom's shield. On that freezing dawn at Thornwall Pass, 1,400 riders charged through sleet and mud. Cassian had fought at the front, lance splintering against enemy armor, his left shoulder shattered by a Kessler blade. 600 men returned. The rest stayed on the blood-soaked field. In the chaos of victory, while searching the enemy command tent, Cassian found the leather satchel hidden beneath the commander's desk. Inside were 12 letters, sealed with red wax, bearing the unmistakable crest of House Hargrave. They detailed supply routes, troop positions, and maps of Allied fortifications, all sold to the enemy by Duke Edmund Hargrave himself. The betrayal cut deeper than any lance. Edmund had funded half the war effort, only to sabotage it for profit and power. Cassian had done the honorable thing. He brought the letters to the War Council. Within weeks, House Ashford was erased. False charges of treason rained down like arrows. His father, Lord Commander Victor Ashford, was dragged from his own table in chains. His mother fled and died of fever in a border hovel. His 2 brothers were stripped of everything and sent to die in the eastern mines. The Ashford estates were seized and divided. Edmund Hargrave claimed the vital mountain passes. Every record of their name was burned from the archives. It was as if House Ashford had never existed. Cassian only survived because of her. Young Isolde Pennington had known him since childhood. Their families' estates had bordered each other in the northern valleys. She had been the girl who tied that same blue ribbon around his wrist at a harvest festival, laughing at how his face flushed crimson. When the soldiers came for him, she was already waiting. She hid him in her father's servant quarters, shaved his head with her own hands, dressed him in rough-spun cloth, and gave him the name Caspar Thorne. "Stay alive," she had whispered fiercely that night, pressing the ribbon into his palm. "I will fix this. I swear it." And so he had stayed, hidden in plain sight inside the very house that had destroyed his family. For 30 years he had brushed horses bearing the Hargrave crest, polished boots that walked on stolen Ashford land, and swallowed his pride every single day. All because Isolde asked him to trust her. Because she promised she would restore his name when the time was right. A soft sound pulled Caspar back to the present. Duke Benedict still stood in the doorway, watching him with haunted eyes. "You kept the letters all this time," Benedict said quietly. Caspar nodded. "Isolde told me never to use them unless she gave the word. I kept them hidden behind a loose stone in the stables." Benedict exhaled slowly. "Serafina is already searching the house. She suspects there is more to Isolde's death than the physicians claimed. And she sees you as the last threat to her power." Caspar's blood ran cold. The new Duchess was not content with mere humiliation. She wanted everything buried, the secrets, the promises, and anyone who remembered the truth. If Serafina discovered the letters before Benedict could act, there would be no restoration, no justice, only silence, and perhaps another quiet death disguised as natural causes. Caspar looked down at the blue ribbon, now stained with the faint memory of old blood and decades of loyalty. The woman who had protected him was gone. The man who might have helped him was trapped in a new marriage, and the new Duchess was closing in. Caspar's fingers traced the frayed edge of the blue ribbon as the past pulled him deeper. He could still feel the cold night air on his skin from 30 years ago, the night everything changed. Soldiers had stormed the barracks looking for the last surviving Ashford. He had barely escaped with his life when Isolde appeared like a guardian angel in the shadows. Barely 19, she moved with surprising calm. In a hidden corner of her father's estate, she cut away his noble curls, dressed him in coarse servant's garb, and pressed a new name upon him. "Caspar Thorne," she had said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "From this night forward, that is who you are. You must disappear into the lowest ranks of House Hargrave. It is the last place they will look. He had resisted at first. They murdered my family. How can you ask me to serve them?" Isolde had taken his hands in hers, the same hands that would one day become those of a duchess, "because I cannot fight them alone. Edmund Hargrave's corruption runs deep, but his son Benedict, there is good in him. I've him to marry him soon. Give me time, Cassian. Stay hidden. I will undo what his father has done. I swear it on the love I have carried for you since we were children." Her eyes had held such conviction that he had believed her. So he had walked into the lion's den and become Caspar Thorne. The years that followed were a special kind of torment. Every morning he brushed horses that carried Hargrave banners into battle. He polished saddles made from leather bought with Ashford gold. He served meals to the very men who had divided his family's lands among themselves. Duke Edmund would stride past him in the stables without a second glance, never knowing the trembling servant he ignored was the boy whose future he had stolen. The humiliation cut deepest in small moments. Watching Edmund's guests toast to their growing wealth while Caspar mopped wine stains from the floor. Hearing laughter from the great hall while he ate thin stew in the servants' quarters. The constant ache of knowing his mother had died alone in a border town, his brothers broken in the mines, all because he had chosen honor. Yet Isolde made the pain bearable. She visited him nearly every morning. Sometimes they spoke of strategy and patience. Other times they simply remembered happier days, riding through autumn fields, the harvest festival where she had tied the ribbon on his wrist. Her presence was the only light in his shadowed existence. "I will make this right," she would promise before leaving. "Don't let those horses miss me." He endured for her, year after year, decade after decade. Even after Edmund died and Benedict took control, Caspar remained silent. He watched Benedict slowly distance himself from his father's rot, guided by Isolde's gentle wisdom. But she never told Benedict the full truth about his identity. Not until the very end. A sharp knock pulled Caspar back to the present. The antechamber door opened again. This time it was not Benedict. Lady Seraphina Hargrave stepped inside, her morning gown trailing like spilled ink. She closed the door behind her with deliberate softness. Alone with the old servant, her earlier cruelty had transformed into something colder, more calculated. "I know who you are, Lord Ashford," she said quietly, circling him slowly. "And I know what my husband's precious first wife was planning. Restoration, titles, reparations from the Hargrave coffers." Her lips curved in a thin smile. How touching. How dangerous. She stopped in front of him, eyes gleaming with ambition. "Isolde is gone now, and I will not allow a pathetic ghost from the past to threaten what I have built. Tell me where you hid those letters, or I will ensure you join her far sooner than you expect." Caspar's heart pounded as he stared at the new Duchess. The woman who now held the power to destroy everything Isolde had fought for, and he realized with chilling certainty that the real battle had only just begun. Seraphina's threat lingered in the small antechamber like smoke. Caspar remained seated, his frail body tense, refusing to look away from her cold gaze. Before he could answer, the door opened once more. Duke Benedict Hargrave stepped in, his tall frame filling the doorway. His eyes flicked between his new wife and the old servant, a shadow of conflict crossing his usually impassive face. "Leave us," Benedict said quietly to Seraphina. For a moment, defiance flashed in her eyes, but she offered a tight smile and swept from the room, her silk skirts whispering promises of future trouble. Alone with the Duke, Caspar felt the weight of years between them. Benedict had never been a warm man. People described him as precise, calculating, and ruthless when necessary. He had expanded House Hargrave's holdings through shrewd alliances and quiet pressure rather than open war. Yet under Isolde's influence, he had slowly begun to change. She had shown him the rot left by his father, Duke Edmund. Together they had quietly returned stolen lands, restructured unfair contracts, and tried to wash away the old stains of betrayal. Isolde had been his conscience, his guide, the one person who could soften his cold edges. For 22 years of marriage, she had stood beside him, turning a house built on treachery into something closer to honorable. But 3 months after her death, Benedict had done the unexpected. He had married Lady Serafina Voss, the sharp-witted and ambitious younger sister of Lord Peregrine Voss, one of the nobles who had profited most from the old Ashford lands. It had been a political match, many assumed, a way to secure new alliances in the uncertain time after losing Isolde. Few understood how quickly Serafina had begun to tighten her grip on the household. Caspar remembered the night Isolde had finally told Benedict the full truth. It was 4 months before her death. She had grown terribly weak by then, her cough deep and rattling, yet her mind remained sharp. In their private chamber, fire crackling softly, she had taken Benedict's hands and revealed everything. The letters, the false treason, the 30 years Caspar had lived among them as a ghost. Benedict had sat in silence for a long time, staring into the flames. "You knew before you married me," he had finally said. "Yes," Isolde replied softly. "I married you because someone needed to make it right, and I could not do it alone." In the weeks that followed, they had worked every evening, drafting documents for the full restoration of House Ashford. Letters to the Crown, legal proofs, reparations drawn from Hargrave wealth. Isolde had poured her fading strength into those papers, determined to finish what she had promised Cassian so long ago. But she had slipped away before the final seals could be sent. Now Benedict stood before Caspar, looking older than his years. "Serafina found some of the correspondence in Isolde's study," he said heavily. "She knows enough to be dangerous. She believes restoring you would weaken my position. And hers." Caspar's voice was rough when he spoke. "Your father destroyed my family. Your first wife protected me. What will you do now?" Benedict did not answer immediately. The conflict was clear in his eyes. Loyalty to Isolde's memory, battling against the pressure of his new marriage, and the political web Serafina was already spinning. "She is pushing for a quick investigation into Isolde's death," Benedict admitted. "Not to find truth, but to control the narrative. To paint you as a threat who may have had reason to harm her." A chill ran through Caspar. The new Duchess was not just ambitious. She was methodical. And she had chosen her battlefield well, turning grief into suspicion, and suspicion into a weapon. Outside the antechamber, the sounds of the departing nobles filtered through the heavy doors. The funeral was ending, but for Caspar Thorne, the true ordeal was only beginning. Serafina Voss had stepped into Isolde's place with terrifying speed. And unless Benedict found the courage to honor his late wife's final promise, the last survivor of House Ashford would be crushed beneath the weight of new betrayals. The weight of Benedict's words pressed heavily on Caspar as the Duke paced the small antechamber. Memories surged again, unbidden, carrying him back to those final, precious months with Isolde. She had known death was coming for her. The cough had grown worse, the blood on her handkerchiefs more frequent, yet she refused to let weakness stop her. Every evening, after the household retired, she and Benedict would sit by the fire in their private chamber. Papers covered the table between them, legal documents, letters to the Crown, detailed plans for the restoration of House Ashford. Isolde's voice, though frail, had never lost its strength. "He has waited 30 years, Benedict. We cannot fail him now." She would reach for her husband's hand, her touch still warm despite the illness consuming her. "Cassian gave up everything because I asked him to trust me. Now we must finish what we started." Benedict had worked tirelessly beside her, his usual cold precision softened by love and guilt. He drafted reparations from the Hargrave treasury. He prepared formal appeals acknowledging his father Edmund's betrayal. Together they built a careful path through the dangerous politics of the western provinces. Isolde guided every decision, her foresight as sharp as ever. But her body betrayed her faster than they anticipated. In her final weeks, she grew so weak she could barely leave her bed. Caspar had been allowed secret visits to her chamber. He would sit beside her, holding her hand, while she whispered the same promise she had given him decades earlier. "Stay strong, my dearest friend. Benedict will see it through. The horses will need you, and so will the truth." On the night she died, the door to her chambers had been locked from within. A half-finished cup of tea sat on her writing desk. The physicians called it sudden cardiac failure, natural causes. Yet Isolde had confided in both men that she feared something darker. A growing suspicion that someone close was growing impatient for her to disappear. Now, 3 months later, that fear had taken human form in Serafina. Benedict stopped pacing and looked at Caspar directly. She moved into the ducal chambers the day after the funeral. Already she is replacing Isolde's staff with her own loyal people. She has demanded the keys to every locked study and chest. Last night she asked me pointed questions about the blue ribbon and what it might signify. Caspar felt a fresh wave of dread. Serafina was not merely ambitious, she was methodical and ruthless. In the brief time since Isolde's death, she had consolidated power with terrifying efficiency. Whispers among the servants spoke of her late-night meetings with her brother, Lord Peregrine Voss, and other nobles who still held pieces of the old Ashford lands. They saw the potential restoration as a direct threat to their wealth and influence. "She believes Isolde's kindness was weakness," Benedict continued, his voice low, "and she views you as the final loose thread. If she finds those letters before I can secure the crown's protection." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Caspar rose slowly, his knee protesting. "Then what will you do, Your Grace? Will you honor the woman who made you better? Or will you let this new duchess turn your house back into the darkness your father created?" Benedict's silence was heavy. For the first time, Caspar saw true torment in the Duke's eyes, caught between loyalty to a dead wife's dream and the living pressure of a dangerous new marriage. Outside, the cathedral bells began to toll, signaling the end of the funeral procession. But for Caspar Thorne, there would be no peaceful mourning. Serafina Hargrave had declared war on the past, and she was moving faster than any of them had anticipated. The question was no longer whether the truth would come out. It was whether any of them would survive when it did. The days after the funeral blurred into a nightmare of whispers and shadows. Serafina wasted no time. Within a week, she had orchestrated a formal tribunal in the great hall of Hargrave Manor, transforming mourning into spectacle. Nobles filled the room, their eyes bright with curiosity and greed. Lord Peregrine Voss, Serafina's brother, sat prominently beside her, his sharp features mirroring her own cold ambition. Caspar was dragged forward in chains, no longer the invisible servant but the accused. The faded blue ribbon had been taken from him as evidence. He stood before the assembled lords, frail and trembling, while Serafina presided with the authority of a queen. "Lord Cassian Ashford," she announced, her voice ringing clear and venomous, "has lived among us for 30 years under false pretense. A traitor's son, hidden by the late Duchess Isolde's misguided mercy." She held up the bundle of old letters, the very proof that had once condemned Duke Edmund Hargrave. "These documents prove his family's guilt. Yet instead of justice, the previous duchess sought to restore his title and drain the Hargrave coffers in reparations." Gasps swept through the hall. Lord Peregrine Voss leaned forward, adding fuel to the fire. This is not restoration. It is theft disguised as honor. If we allow this ghost to claim lands and wealth, every noble house will tremble. House Hargrave must remain strong. Duke Benedict sat at the head of the table, his face carved from stone. He had tried to delay the proceedings, but Serafina had moved too quickly, rallying allies and spreading rumors that Isolde's death might have been hastened by those loyal to the old secrets. The implication was clear. Caspar was dangerous. He had motive. He had opportunity. Caspar felt the noose tightening. The common folk who had loved Isolde had sent petitions, but Serafina's men had intercepted many of them. Support from below was being crushed beneath threats and bribes. The tribunal was not about truth. It was about elimination. You kept these letters for decades, Serafina said, circling him like a predator. Hidden in my house, planning your revenge. Tell me, old man, did you poison the tea that took my husband's beloved first wife? Did you finally grow tired of waiting? The accusation landed like a blow. Benedict's hand tightened on the arm of his chair, but he remained silent. The conflict in his eyes was plain to see, yet the pressure of his new wife and her powerful brother held him frozen. Caspar lifted his head, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I kept them because Isolde asked me to. She wanted justice, not revenge. She believed your husband could be better than his father. Serafina laughed softly, a sound that sent ice through the room. How convenient. A dying woman's fantasies. The late Duchess was weak, too soft for the realities of power. But I am not. She turned to the gathered nobles. I propose we end this charade, strip impostor of any false claims, return the letters to the fire where they belong, and ensure House Hargrave faces no further threats from the past, or its remnants. Lord Peregrine nodded in approval. Several other lords murmured agreement, their eyes gleaming at the prospect of keeping their stolen Ashford lands. Caspar felt the walls closing in. The tribunal was slipping toward a foregone conclusion. Without Isolde's guiding hand, and with Benedict paralyzed by his new marriage, there was no one left to fight for him. The letters that should have brought justice were now weapons turned against their keeper. As the proceedings continued into the night, Caspar caught Benedict's gaze for one brief moment. In it, he saw torment, but also something else, a flicker of doubt, a question of whether he would truly betray Isolde's final wish. Yet Serafina's influence was growing stronger by the hour. If the tribunal ruled against him tomorrow, there would be no restoration, only silence, only disappearance, and perhaps another quiet death in the shadows of Hargrave Manor. The tribunal's final morning dawned grey and unforgiving. Caspar Thorne, Lord Cassian Ashford, stood once more before the assembled nobles, his frail body barely able to remain upright. Chains no longer bound him, but the weight of 30 years and Serafina's triumph pressed down harder than iron ever could. Duke Benedict sat at the head of the hall, silent as stone. Serafina occupied the seat beside him like a conqueror, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Lord Peregrine Voss watched with satisfied eyes as the final ruling was read. House Ashford would not be restored. The letters were declared forgeries born of a servant's bitterness. Any claims to land or title were denied. The blue ribbon was burned in front of everyone, its ashes scattered like forgotten dreams. Caspar did not protest. He simply stood there, head slightly bowed, as the last fragments of hope turned to smoke. That evening, in the quiet of the stables he had tended for 3 decades, he waited. The horses shifted restlessly in their stalls, sensing the heavy sorrow in the air. He brushed the old grey mare Clara, with slow, trembling strokes. The same horse Isolde had named years ago. The door creaked open. Duke Benedict entered alone, his face etched with exhaustion and shame. I tried, he said quietly, but Serafina, she has too many allies now. My hands are tied. Caspar looked at the man who had once knelt beside him at Isolde's coffin. She asked you to make it right, on her deathbed. Was that promise worth so little? Benedict's eyes glistened. For a moment, the cold duke seemed on the verge of breaking. She was the best of us. I failed her. And I have failed you. Before more could be said, Serafina appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 loyal guards. Her smile was soft, almost gentle, the most terrifying expression Caspar had yet seen from her. "It is time, old man," she said. "You have been a burden on this house long enough. There is a small cottage prepared for you on the far border. You will leave tonight." Quietly, Caspar understood. This was not mercy. It was exile, or worse. A convenient disappearance disguised as kindness. He reached into his coat and withdrew the final letter Isolde had given him, hidden even from Serafina's searches. With shaking hands, he pressed it into Benedict's palm. "She asked me to give you this if the worst happened," Caspar whispered. "Read it when you are alone." As the guards led him away, Caspar paused at the stable door and looked back at the horses one last time. "Don't let them miss her," he murmured, the old code falling softly from his lips. He was found 3 weeks later in the remote cottage. The official report said his heart had simply given out. The same quiet fate that had taken Isolde. But those who had known him whispered of a different truth. A man who had carried too much for too long, finally setting down his burden when there was nothing left to hold on to. Duke Benedict buried him in an unmarked grave near the eastern tree line, far from the family crypt. He could not risk Serafina's wrath by placing him beside Isolde. Yet that night, alone in his chambers, he read Isolde's final letter. Her words, written in her fading hand, spoke not of victory or justice, but of love and forgiveness. "My dearest Cassian was the strongest man I ever knew. He never raised a fist, only his heart. If he falls, remember that true power was never in titles or lands. It was in the 30 years he stayed, because I asked him to." Benedict folded the letter and wept for the first time since Isolde's death. Serafina's reign over House Hargrave grew stronger. The past was buried deeper than ever. But sometimes, late at night, the old stable hands swore they could hear faint whispers near Clara's stall. A man speaking softly to a horse, reminding her not to miss the only duchess who had ever truly mattered. And in the quiet corners of the western provinces, a fragile rumor began to spread. That some loyalties refuse to die, no matter how thoroughly the powerful try to erase them. If this story has you hooked, if you can feel that slow, gripping tension, go ahead and like, subscribe, and share it with someone who enjoys unforgettable storytelling. New stories drop every day, each one more intense than the last. And before you leave, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing who's part of this journey. We may be wrapping up here, but the drama doesn't end. If your pulse is still racing, keep it going. The next 2 stories on your screen go even deeper, darker, bolder, impossible to ignore. Subscribe so we stay connected. Then pick one and dive in. Your next obsession is just one click away.